kuyasanga zina mulefumo kumwepusha lifumo ly'abandi lifumo ly'abapasita mayo nonono lefyo bakupele lifumo mayo umwana ebe inyerine Palentumo kubyanga kwa buga munukuwe Babulire kitiko Okwambo kulanje baji mwana wesu Alana Yesu bali nabakapa wakwe Yesu alikwete Salome Ona Yesu alikwete Maria Magdalena Yesu alikwete Marita Paulo nao ali na Femi Twise kuli Petero alikwete Doka Kaishimukana ine chimo na Yesu nayo Kawakana ine wakana Paulo Kukana ine chimo na Petro Na yeshio kukana bambadilisha Chemele ni mapasi katata Yesu Kabili mapasi kanamwe Kimamwala chitefi tata Kabili mwashima koko yangu Ujete manaka ya palaji Tumuchote lele ichawasha Natolo mupamba Shakala chimona Efyo batitiriwa munandika kwa tata Kapasita kumutumo lusaka Alenya tukapofyo mukasa na boba fika Konkonko kuito niwena Nebashika chakwe nisuirako Maenda shadira pasita muna ushiko Atinalete latu ilisumae Manishi manefe wa pasita bachindama Nikashiana kuma Yesu lako Wengila abapade chipuna Mulume obe ni mayo na mpole mwete Ni mayo na mpele butikoni Noma niweka wika chea leti Waka mungwe kabana mayo mupata matu Kashi ya ninja kuilishi ya konomba lise Osole kuluilwa palwala nae Mono munga ngate mulatu Ayeshi okukana bapatilisha Ebele ni mapati katata Yesu Abili mwe mapati kanamwe Yue mwana chitefi tata Abili mwe mashima pepo yamwe Ushete mwe mapa ya pabati Tumuchote lele ichagwasha Akasuka kujaye telefoni kujikia Debe kulokuwa shara Wete faisi Maumaru wa yako mshashi Wakula yunguira Hallelujah. Hello. Good evening, Chwempala. Elias Munsha here, and I'm coming to you live from Calgary, Alberta, from our TV Bakwetu studios.
Good evening, world, Southern Africa, America, Australia, Europe, and everywhere around the world where you are getting our signal from. I'm saying signal because I want to make it sound as if we are coming via satellite, and yet it's through internet. So getting our what? What is it with internet? Anyway, whatever it is that you are getting, thank you for joining us here today. We have a very exciting guest, and I'm going to read a little bit about him before I ask him to say hello to all of us. Dr. Grieve Chelwa is a director of research at the Institute on Race and Political Economy at the New School, where he leads the Institute's work on inclusive economic rights. Before joining the New School, Grieve was a senior lecturer in economics at the University of Cape Town's Graduate School of Business. And before that, he was the inaugural postdoctoral fellow at the Center for African Studies at Harvard University. He was previously a visiting postdoctoral fellow at the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research. Grieve holds a BA in economics from the University of Zambia and advanced degrees in economics, including a PhD from the University of Cape Town. Before taking up a career in academia, Grieve was a banker with Citibank and completed postings in Congo DR, Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. In short, Dr. Grieve Chelwa, our guest today, is an economist who was taught at the University of Cape Town and at the University of Harvard. But most importantly, he is a Zambian, one of the most educated economists you can ever come across in our country. Dr. Grieve Chelwa, we are very excited to have you on TV Bakwetu. Welcome.
Council Elias Munsha, it is my utmost honor to be a guest on this show. I want to bring congratulations from I'm in Lusaka right now, so the people of Zambia appreciate your efforts in freeing this country in the lead up to August 12. This was an essential site, a public space where we all gathered to make sense of what was happening. And for that, we're eternally grateful. And thank you again for having me as a guest.
Thank you very much. We've always been receiving very positive feedback, Dr. Chelwa, and I really, really appreciate that we could be part of the change. But the work started then, it continues, and that's why we are having you today, because to be honest, if you're economics, they are very difficult to understand. Because you economists are very much like lawyers. First of all, you use very general language, but you can't understand But secondly, you also argue amongst yourselves because there is this school of thought, the other school of thought, and the other school of thought. And so you are just like us. But today, I want us to get some principles going for our people in Chwempala and Milenge so that they understand exactly what we are going to be dealing with. In general terms, we want to focus, first of all, on what went wrong in the past. Oh,
no.
And it was my birthday. So on my birthday. Isn't that a crisis?
No, it is not. I think it is because you're growing older and wiser and often forgetful. So it's a sign of age and wisdom, Wamunsha.
Okay. And so generally, we want to look at what went wrong. Everybody agrees that under the Lungu administration, something was wrong. Okay. But what are the solutions? I think the Lungu administration itself started with some solutions here and there. And now that we have a new government, they are proposing some solutions. We can't say that they've already implemented them. They're proposing them. And at the center of these solutions is one institution known as IMF. Now, I've read enough of your tweets. I've read enough of some of the things that you say, and it appears like you are quite skeptical about the IMF. Now, I could be wrong, so I'll let you clarify all that. So that is our general structure of our program today. And then we are going to have several of our TV Bakwetu family that are going to come on and ask you a few questions. I read a little bit about who you are, Dr. Chelwa, but please kindly tell the audience, who is Dr. Grieve Chelwa?
Thank you so much, Council Munsha. You know, a man who we're very proud of, our export to Canada, and hoping one day we get him back here home. Who is Grieve Chelwa? I'm a Zambian. I was born in Lusaka, where everybody else was born in Lusaka was born at the University Teaching Hospital that the KK administration gifted us. I was born at that hospital. Should I say when I was born? Is it necessary to say when I was born, or it is?
It's okay, but we know that Abagote sometimes they don't want to say how old they are. But you are not. You look extremely young, and so.
I was born in 1983. I don't know if that is young or old. It feels like it is somewhere. I'm trailing you quite nicely. I know you are about 4 years my senior. So I'm
Yes. Yes. So for me, in any Mdala. So you need to Mdala when you.
Okay, Mdala. So I was born in Lusaka. Went to schools in and then moved around the country a little bit. My father used to work for Lima Bank, the state agriculture bank that was liquidated in the early 90s. And then I went to finished off my high school at David Counter Secondary School here in Lusaka, near where State House is located, around about there. And then went to the University of Zambia, where I read economics. Subsequently went to be a banker, went back to school, and I've been in academia for a while now. I hope that's a fair retelling of my journey, but that's my journey. I used to live in Cape Town. I left Cape Town last year. I'm now in Lusaka, and I was so happy to be in Lusaka during this momentous occasion. I voted, and I was there partying with the rest of Lusaka in the early morning hours of Monday. I think it was August, I can't remember, August 14 or 15, when His Lordship Judge Esau Chulu declared Hakainde Hichilema the president-elect. And shortly I'll be relocating to New York City, where I've been working remotely from New York City, but I'll be moving to New York City to take up that position that you just described earlier. Bamdara Bamunsha.
No. Just say like Mwadishi Mafia kuno. Takuwa about Bamdara Shan. Ni Elias.
Okay.
You know, it's very when I visit Zambia, you know, we go by council, advocate, Shan. Yeah. Kudishi nothing you Shan. And so now, tell us a little bit about your stint at Harvard. What exactly were you doing there?
Okay, so the academic journey is a very interesting one. So often when you do a PhD, your intention is to teach in a university and research in a university. So that's the journey I picked. You know, people pick different journeys. Munshao is a lawyer. You know, our general was General Norman Paku was in the military. Some people become called to serve the Lord. I think I was called to teach and to research. So I went and studied a PhD. I finished my PhD at the University of Cape Town. What often happens when you finish a PhD is that you spend some time in between a PhD and an academic job. And that period is called a postdoctoral fellowship. You see, post the PhD, postdoctoral. So I was invited to spend my postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard from 2016 to 2017. And I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's the town in which Harvard is located. And basically what you do when you are a postdoctoral fellow is you teach and you research. So I taught in the economics department. I taught a seminar on economic development to what they call sophomores there. I think this is second year, it must be second year undergraduate. I taught that seminar, and then I also did research. I presented my research to several people around there. And then subsequently I now became an academic, and then I went and taught at the University of Cape Town, where I got the first academic job. And I taught there for 3 years in the business school, rising to the rank of senior lecturer. And then now I was blindsided by a very good friend of mine, Professor Derek Hamilton, who runs this Institute on Race and Political Economy at the New School in New York City. And he asked me to come join him to build the institute with him. So it's the first year that the institute has been in existence, and we're building it together. So I hope that helps.
All right, now I do realize that TV Bogot reaches both a mature audience, meaning Ifwe, but it also reaches younger ones. So in economics, what is that? What is economics? What do you study exactly?
Really, economics is it's a social science. Some people think it's a science, but it's really a discipline that studies questions of production and distribution. That is
Okay.
basically what it's about. What to produce, how to share it, is sort of like very simply stated. That is what economics is about. It's just a
Right.
social science that studies production and distribution. How do we produce? How do we share? These seem like very simple questions, but they're very difficult ones to answer, right? How do we share, for example? Are you going to bring in your sense of morality? Are you going to say we share via the market? If we share via the market, only people like Wamunsha who have money will be able to buy.
Okay.
He's people in Chewempala who don't have nothing will be left out. So
Right.
basically, but it's really production and distribution, and then we get very deep into that discussion. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, so you studied it at the University of Zambia.
Mhm.
Now, I do understand that the University of Zambia itself has transformed itself through the years as far as economics is concerned.
Mhm.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about that transformation? Isn't there several schools within
Mhm.
economics?
You're right. That's a fascinating question, Ramonsha. Yes. So, like any discipline, I imagine even like the law, it has gone through fads, what one may simply call fads or fashions, right? Or
Right.
schools of thought, some which have been dominant at certain times and others which have been dominant at other times. So if you went to the University of Zambia in 1966 when it was established and you took a
Right.
course in economics, you were taught economics in a different way. The emphasis back then was probably on central planning. A
Okay.
planned economy, right? Which we used to write up development plans between 1970 and 1966 and 1989. We wrote up 4 development plans, right?
Right.
So that was the essence of how you did economics back then. It was a central planning, very much influenced along socialist sort of inclinations. And then in the 1990s, with the crisis of socialism around the world, kwalisa nomba eri ati neoliberalism yabena Thatcher and yabena Ronald Reagan. That idea that the free market, yabena Chilwa, Chilwa used to love the late President FTJ Chilwa used to love telling us about Adam Smith and the free market. So
Right.
if you did economics in the late 90s and early 2000s like I did, right, it's quite likely that our teachers who were taught in the early 90s, late 80s, were taught pretty much along these ideas of free market economics. So that is pretty much the dominant way in which economics has been taught now at the university. So it has gone through different phases. And right now, it would be difficult to find a Marxist economist at the University of Zambia in the economics department,
Oh
right?
no, what
Where
about I don't want to call any names, but I want to treat very carefully. Okay? Now, how do I deal with this? But there is a Russian trained economist right now. Now, Dr. Chelwa, I don't want you to put yourself in issues here, but all I'm asking is, isn't that head of economics department at the University of Zambia Marxist or something like that? No?
as I understand it, Dr. Lubinda Habazok, I think is the gentleman you're referring to, he is not in the economics department, but in the business school. And I think that distinction is important. So there's a graduate
Oh,
school of business, and is the director of the graduate school of business. But the economics department is a separate entity,
okay.
right? With its own head of department, who currently is Dr. Deo Mdenda, my former teacher.
All
Uh,
right.
but in the
Okay.
economics
I didn't
department,
know that because Baratutinia, if we Baba in the School of Economics at the University of Zambia, Kanshi, it's not. Okay, thank you very much for
no,
clarifying that.
although I must clarify that you can be an economist in the business school,
Okay,
right?
all right.
Yeah. So because the business school has different facets: psychology, leadership, economics, and so on and so forth. So he
Right.
might very well be an economist, but in the business school.
Okay. All right. Now, you have mentioned several fads, right? 1966, 1991. So in your opinion, do you see that it's the politics that informs economics, or is it economics that is informing the politics? What's going on there? Why should how the University of Zambia teaches its economics be subjected to who we elect as president?
That's a fascinating question. I wish you had told me this would be a thesis defense, because my question was,
I'm
which I
defending
asked.
Dr. Grieve. I'm defending a doctoral dissertation in
Uh-huh,
2 weeks' time.
uh-huh.
It's on trade state relations. It's a degree in theology. So
Okay.
because you mentioned if you're defending now, anyway,
Yeah.
yes, please, Doc. Let us know about that.
congratulations, by the way. It's not easy to get to that stage where you're almost defending the thesis. So I congratulate you in advance. You're right. So that's a fascinating question. How is it that economics, which is supposed to be an objective science, is going through fads? Physics, you don't have fads. Takwa what, what should I believe that atoms in so no, right? Yeah, it's exactly that. Exactly.
Because there is a new president in power.
Exactly. I understand exactly. So you're right. I think it's really the political atmosphere really influences, like political interests, ideology, all these things influence how people think about economics, right? When FTJ was coming into power in 1991, the World Bank and the IMF had changed ideologically, especially the World Bank. The World Bank used to believe in central planning. And then for some reason, change, because we know that things like economic policy are partly ideological, are partly interests. Some people have economic interests, so they will make self-serving arguments about what is the best way to organize society. So if you are Shitikilema 1990s, Filia, the argument was won not on its merits, but pretty much because of political currents around the world. In the 1990s, you would have been silly to defend central planning. People were Gabari Kuseka, because in 1989, the Berlin Wall had just gone down, the Soviet Union had collapsed, which was supposed to be the example of how you should centrally plan an economy, right? So this had collapsed. So all of us then said, Tafi Wombe, who's the last man standing is the United States. A capitalist heaven called the United States. So we should all organize our economies in that way. So that's the real pity about economics. And that's why it's very important that we pay attention to our economists and think about their arguments. Also think about their ideological inclinations. It's important to people. I don't pretend to be 100% objective in my economic analysis. I come with an ideological framing, and a framing that puts emphasis on the poor of Chewempara. I say I will start from that. For me, is the basis. A good economic policy is a policy that privileges the poor. That's my ideological inclination. And then I move. Bambi business, private sector. Bambi that private sector should be privileged. Bambi that so and so should be privileged. So, but that's basically it. One should not take it quite in science, for science. It is also got its own. Quite for Mulo. I hear quite by US Supreme Court that they're conservative judges. They're liberal judges. I get surprised. Shouldn't the case be decided on its merits? But no, is a conservative judge is likely to vote this way. I said, hey. So similarly, economics is like that.
Okay. Now, we obviously agreed under President Lungu. Okay. Now, you've mentioned all these changes. I want to, because sometimes it's difficult for us to appreciate where we are now. So are you able to just let us know how the economy is performing now? Not just the science of economics, right? But under Chiluba, at least we've only got 7 presidents, Dr. Chelwa. So just give us a general overview. Under Chiluba, how is the economy performing? What is informing its its politics and everything else, and then we go to Mwanawasa, because I think Mwanawasa and Rupia, in my opinion, is the golden age in Efyo Mfimona. I know you as a scientist, Mwalat, that disagree, but Efyo Mfimona Gona Kalimo under Mwanawasa and Rupia is like the golden age, because our kaloba is forgiven, our things are going up, but the poor of Chewempala are still struggling. Right? Okay, anyway, over to you.
Okay. All right, that's a good question. I think so. President Chiluba inherits the economy from Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, and the economy is really struggling. It's on its knees when President Chiluba inherits that economy. The question is, why is that economy on its knees? In my own estimation, in my own reading and my own sort of analysis, a huge part of it is democratic inefficiencies. Those were there in the KK days, but also the copper price had a 3-decade decline. A 3-decade decline starting 1970 to 1997. Most people don't understand this. Because commodity prices going through what are called super cycles. Now, right now, we're in another super cycle on the upside, which can last decades as well. So KK was so unfortunate that when he took over, Ashta nationalize our minds, just say 30-year decline in prices. So this, to my mind, is one of the big explanations. So then the country goes broke, precisely because, again, KK has an ambitious expenditure, social expenditure scenario. I'm sure Munsha, you went to school for free in those
No,
glory old days.
I'm not that old to allow a doctor.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am in between because
Okay.
from I started school in 1985 in Chipata.
Okay.
But from Mwaliako Chipata.
My father lived there. We lived there for 5 years. He was branch manager, Lima Bank, Eastern Province. 87 to 92.
All right. So we had just left Chipata. My father was a teacher at Hillside Secondary School. So, and then General Chipakupaku, my co-presenter, is busy working on things in Lusaka. He's abandoned me. I feel okay. So, for me, it's 1985 to about 1990, when I was from grade 1 to about grade 6 or grade 7. When Chelwa comes in 1991, 92, we suffered. That's when they introduced my user fees. That's when they introduced my exam fees. I almost missed my grade 9 exam because I didn't pay on time.
Now, anyway. And this is an important point. So I'll carry on to say, if you're fair that user fees, exam fees, magically from nowhere. IMF. Those were some of the conditionalities that they gave the FTJ government to access balance of payment support.
Okay, Doc, I need to fact check something here. The IMF that you inherited was Kaunda's, the IMF program. Would you agree to that or no?
No, I'll agree. By the way, it's quite interesting. The analysis is quite nuanced. Kaunda agreed to an IMF program in 1984 and then reversed several times when he began to see the pain that was being imposed on the people. Right? You remember those famous food riots and all those kinds of things. Yeah. So Kaunda would agree to an IMF program, but being the humanist that he was, would immediately reverse course when he sees that the pain on the people is too much. So yes, Chelwa inherited some version of an IMF program from KK, but he ran with it full throttle, no turning back. And like KK who would turn back and backslide, as it were. So I'm a user fees and those didn't come from nowhere; those came with the IMF. Anyways, but how is the economy performing in the 90s? The economy is in a bad state in the 90s because the solution to the problem, as came from the IMF and World Bank, was liberalization, privatization, structural adjustment. Structurally adjust your economy because it hasn't worked. And in my own writing, I've said that was a wrong solution to a wrong problem because remember, the problem was pretty much a decline in copper prices. Had we waited just 10 years, the recovery would have come, copper prices. But you see, so it's a misdiagnosis of the crisis. Anyways, but that's the 1990s, right? It's liberalization, structural adjustment, privatization, and this brought hardships. Essentially, what that was what is called fiscal austerity. You fiscally consolidate the budget, right? Slow down expenditure in the budget.
Okay.
That
Doc,
generated the
fiscally, okay, Doc, remember, Doc, fiscally consolidate. There you go, economists.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
As a person from Chwempala, what is to fiscally consolidate?
I see. Oh, you take this language for granted. So the nation's quite in a household, quite a budget. Tunapanga ka budget pa beginning of the month. Ishofola. Shaingira first shafola, then mwekala na bamadama tien tupange ka budget. So that process, of making household budget at the national level can be thought of as a fiscal policy, right? So the fiscal affairs of the country, really we're thinking about expenditure and revenues at the country level, right? So when we say to fiscally consolidate, effort to leranda ati bweshenika expenditure na pa household level number filia DSTV lekeni, ice cream to alaleka, we'll just focus on what we'll call the essentials. Exactly. That's essentially what fiscal policy is. So in the 1990s, IMF values that mamona nomba kaunda ale wasting endarama kushita education, kushita liberate ama neighboring countries, kushita few kukulama hospital, ama university, neshanshani. In the 1990s, you're going to run a cash budget. That was a policy, which is insane because a nation's budgeting process is not like a household. A nation can borrow, a nation can spend over and above what it earns, expecting to pay off in the next period. But IMF valid cash basis. So you will spend based on what you collect. That's why Mweba Munsha Valetirema user fees number Mamona. Because that was the
I
issue.
almost missed my grade 9 exam.
And can you imagine how scary that is? Imagine how scary that is for us, what we would have lost. How many Munshas did we lose in that period? And how many Munshas might we lose if we go down a similar direction? So that is the 1990s, right? The economy is performing very badly. And you are right, by the way, that the 2000s are the golden age in Zambia's economic performance. How do I know this? I look at Pesova, I look at the evidence. Growth rates in the economy, on average, Tuare, we were growing as an economy at 8% per year. Economy could at 8% per year. And what is growth? Growth means that we're producing more. To produce more, we have to employ more people. That's why growth is so important. Because when growth happens,
so what changes between Chiluba left power in 2001? So what changes when Mwanawasa comes in?
Several things. One of the most important thing is the recovery in copper prices that I talked about. The copper prices begin to recover from 2002. You will be surprised how much they recovered. The recovery was amazing. So that's one driver, recovery in copper prices. Also, economic policy, right? We bring in experienced Ngande Magande to come in and run the Ministry of Finance under Mwanawasa's government. And also, the Magande, the Mwanawasa administration reverses some of the effort to actually under fiscal austerity and fiscal consolidation issues of the 1990s. For example, they introduce, and now you have to understand how radical this is, because this is a liberal party. The MMD is a liberal party, a free market party. That's what it is. And yet Mwanawasa introduces the FISP. Then it was called Fertilizer Support Program. This was quite radical. It is introduced in 2003 because when he comes in, we had a drought. I think just about his coming in, we had a drought in 2001. And they diagnosed to understand, why do we have this persistent shortage of maize, right? So persistent that in 1997, I think there was that Carlington maize scandal, remember, whereby we had a shortage of maize. Our Minister of Finance, then Edith Nawakwi, went to find maize abroad and the guy disappeared. You remember that story?
The reason why I'm laughing is because you have a way of bringing in names and name dropping in a way that our viewers like.
Oh, okay.
They're reacting and they like it because you are throwing in name dropping. Okay. So the maize is connected because in 97, okay, please continue. I shouldn't hold you because I hear we presenters talk too much and they need to stop. Go ahead.
Okay, I hope you can still hear me because you on my side are frozen, but I'll assume that the audience can still hear me.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So President Mwanawasa launches the fertilizer support program. It was called Fertilizer Support Program. And this then begins to increase our maize output year on year. And ever since that program was launched, we've been a net exporter of maize. We've hardly had the kind of maize shortages which we used to have in the 1990s. I want to be the audience who are older enough and mature enough to remember how we always used to get bags of maize donated by the people of America, those kinds of things. This has not happened in recent memory, right? That's one, again, explanation that the MMD government begins to reverse on some of these very disastrous policies of the 1990s. And then you talked about it, Mamusha, reaching hippie completion point in, I think, 2005. That was also a big turning point because it freed up our foreign exchange reserves, foreign exchange inflows, because now instead of servicing this debt, which we'd inherited from KK, right, which also Bachilo had added on to, we could now spend it on productive activities, buying medicine and all those kinds of things. So, but that's the golden age. And I graduated into the job market in 2007. And I remember jobs were plenty, right? That's what happens. Numbers don't lie, right? Jobs were plenty, right? And then the MMD government, I suspect you want me to talk a little bit about the PF decade as well. Maybe
yes, of course.
Okay.
You know, Dr. Grieve Chelwa, today, Karaptira Mwachira Ipekanya to do an hour program. Please, I'll give you a break so that muye mulande na bama yokobati. Wako to fire for an extra hour because we can't let you go. You know, this is what our audience wants. You are in the lecture hall. Please go ahead.
Okay, so
that's the MMD.
That's the MMD government. Very steady. The MMD government has got two phases, and everybody should remember that. The Chiluba phase, which was ultra neoliberal, ultra free market oriented, ultra retrenchment, austerity, consolidation, and then we have the MMD one. Sorry, the Mwanawasa MMD, Mwanawasa Banda MMD, which was different, which learned from the scenes of the 90s and tried to begin to reverse them. You remember this is when they even introduced free primary schooling. This happened under Mwanawasa. So you can see that they had learned. That's the kind of leader Mwanawasa was. He could see the mistakes of the 90s, the discontent that led to 80% of the population voting against him in 2001. That's what it was. Just that the 50 plus 1 then. So he could see that. And by 2006, he had increased his vote share precisely because of some of these pro-poor policies that he puts in place. So in 2011, we get a new government. Right?
Okay. Now, Doctor, before you go to 2011, I want to okay. When Sata, you see, Sata is a huge contradiction, in my opinion, right? He's such a huge contradiction because he's part of the ultra, the what you are calling ultra liberal, whatever it is, in the 90s. But in 2001, he changes, right? So what does he become? Because he then goes after Mwanawasa. So Mwanawasa is trying to be socialist or whatever it is, and Michael Sata is still beating the drum that life is too expensive. What was that going on? Now, not Sata in power, because Sata in power, you're going to deal with it in 2011.
Yes,
but Sata the candidate during Mwanawasa and Rupiah Band.
I think also Sata, like any politician who's a master at politics, is able to read the room, right? And able to see the discontent and play on that discontent. Now, even though we are lauding Mwanawasa, we're praising him. We're praising him taking the country from a very low base in the 1990s, right? It was just taking the country from a very low base. And I think Sata could see the discontents that were generated by the 90s. By the way, the youth that voted for Michael Sata in 2011 overwhelmingly are the youth of the 1990s, the left behind youths, the people who are not so lucky like Wamunsha to not sit for an exam and whatever. So Sata could see the discontent that privatization brought, retrenchments brought, collapsing of towns. I mean, Luansha was completely a shell of its former self because of privatization. So Sata played on that discontent. Right, because this is what free market orthodoxy does. It generates inequalities and discontent. So this is what Sata was playing into, I think, in my opinion. This is what he was playing. Now, again, I'm not saying that the Mwanawasa administration didn't do well. They did well, given where they were coming from, given the dark 1990s. The 1990s were dark. Quali HIV, AIDS, it was just a very horrible time, right? So this is where, and then Sata capitalized on the fact that the Mwanawasa administration didn't go far enough, right? They were still, even though they were radical in the liberal sense, but they were still quite neoliberal, right? There was some privatization of the mines that was going on in the Mwanawasa days. Zanaco was privatized in the Mwanawasa days, if you remember, right? And then towards the end, you remember the MMD government sold Zamtel to Lab Green, the Libyans, and then Finance Bank and all that stuff. So anyways, so this is what Sata was playing into. There was still discontent, right? There was still inequality. And that's why his messaging was really directed towards the inequality. More money in your pockets, large social spending, I'll build houses, those kinds of things. Again, it's also important to realize Sata is a student of the KK days. This is where he cut his teeth. In the KK days, he was, I think, am I mistaken I might be getting it wrong, but wasn't he a member of parliament for Kabwata, I think?
He might have been junior minister of local government decentralization.
Exactly. So he is also a student of the KK days. I think some of that might have come back to him, right?
Okay.
And you remember exactly, and you remember that he was also one of the last people, as I understand it, one of the last people to jump ship from UNIP when MMD was coming. So
All right.
exactly. Anyways, but
Another contradiction of the Saturdays, Guy Scott.
I'll let you explain that contradiction.
Now, how does Guy Scott then, right? So how do these two become friends? Because Michael Sata is trying to exploit the Mwanawasa thing, but Guy Scott, who was part of the Chiluba thing, also stands up against Mwanawasa. And it appears like the way Guy Scott is explaining in this book is that Chiluba was a reluctant liquidator, or is he privatizer? That's what I get. Anyway.
I believe that, by the way. I think one case study of that is the mines. You know that we sold the mines in the second term of Chiluba. Almost everything else was sold in the first term. But as I understand it, Chiluba was quite careful to not sell the country's jewels. And this is why even the privatization of the mines took a different structure to the privatization of everything else. I think with the mines, with everything else, it was ZPA, Zambia Privatization Agency, led it. But with the mines, we set up a privatization negotiating committee chaired by Francis Kaunda. And if you've read Francis Kaunda's book, Selling the Country Silvers, I've forgotten what the actual title is of the book. He does say Family Silver, yes. Francis Kaunda will tell you in that book that the president was very, very reluctant. So I think I'm not surprised to hear Guy Scott refer to Chiluba as a reluctant liquidator. By the way, again, Chiluba was a trade unionist. He must have been a Marxist at some point in his life. He must have believed in, in the workers, in the people.
Even his children, Tito.
Exactly. Yes. Tito,
he named his children after Castro, Tito. Exactly. He named his children after Marxist leaders, communist leaders. Yeah.
So yes, so I'm not surprised. Again, but you have to understand the 90s was a very confusing time. Even for the most committed Marxist, it was going to be difficult to defend Marxism and Marxist-Leninist type of way of organizing the economy. Soviet Union had collapsed. The biggest experiment had collapsed. So it was a very difficult time ideologically.
Dr. Grieve, take it up. 2011, we now have the Michael Sata government.
Okay, so we've got the Michael Sata government. Now, Michael Sata comes in and with a plan of pretty much undoing the harms of the 1990s, right? So the fact that, for example, we're running a cash budget meant that things like infrastructure expenditure became neglected over the 20 years that the MMD was in power, right? I think it's not controversial to say that infrastructure-wise we were lagging behind. So Michael Sata sees that, and then he says, you know what?
By infrastructure, you misebo
hospital, school, power plants, or all those, that's infrastructure. And then in the 20 years MMD government led us, because they were on a cash budget basis, it is difficult to build infrastructure from cash, from the revenue, from collecting AMA taxes alone. It's impossible. Nobody has done it, not even America. To do those kinds of large-scale infrastructure projects, you have to borrow, right? So now that is the philosophy of Michael Sata. Now, that's a laudable philosophy, great on paper, but the one thing we always have to remember about politics is that when you implement some of these large-scale infrastructure projects, chances, that's those kinds of things, And as we know that Michael Sata was not very healthy, right, in the time that he was president. So, I mean, it's an open question whether he was really on top of everything that was happening anyways. But so that was the ambitious plan that he launched. I'm going to increase expenditure to catch up, because we took a wrong turn over the last 20 years as a country. And that's where the borrowing now started, right? But there were some mistakes with the borrowing, because also the terms, the duration of the loans was too short. You can't borrow for 10 years and invest in infrastructure and hope that it pays back. Infrastructure takes long to pay back. So mistakes, but those mistakes are because I think there were some chances. Also have to, the banks who were advising us, also they wanted to make.
By chances, you mean mwali mpupu, mwali bakilenga.
Exactly, and on different fronts, not just domestically, even externally. Remember, bankers make fees from these kinds of things.
Important. Okay.
Yes.
So banks know, and banks are there, and they are chancers. They see what is happening, and they want to steal. Is that what you're saying?
Because
I
it
know
works.
you can't say that. I can say that.
No, I'll explain how it works. It works like this, because when you're trying to borrow abroad, you can't go fyafine mwatumafya bastumbe komsokotwane ati kabiye ni mwala kusengera $1 kabiye ni ku London musende ku $1. No, these things are arranged by international banks. They are called in investment banking warandati. I don't know. I think they call them the leading bank or syndicating banks or something. It's a technical term for it. They're the ones who arrange everything for you. They do everything for you. Arrange the structure of the loan, how it will look. Kulakwini barabula mama fees. Barabula makwati ati 10% or 1%, whatever. Barabula ka fee. Mamona. So when mamona bala fora, and then it becomes your problem. Bambapo. 10 years ago, it was, they go on over in their careers. So one has to be very careful. The banks can mislead you. The banks can misadvise you. Now, I'm not suggesting that happened, but it's possible it happened. We've got a case study next door, Mozambique. Credit Suisse, and there are court records for this. Credit Suisse clearly conspired with some elites in Mozambique to burden that country with debt. It's called, look it up, it's called the tuna bond scandal. It is there. Banks do this. Mwali wa kabwala na mwena mabanki.
All right. Yeah. So Sata.
So we go on this ambitious borrowing drive. If we issue a first Euro bond in 2012, $750 million. We issue a second Euro bond in, I think, 2014, and I think a third one.
Dr. Chelwa, this is this thing of issuing, because sometimes Okay, so when you say they've issued 750 million bond, so is that correct?
In Congole, the way a country borrows, Vamusha, it's not like the way you and I borrow. The way a country borrows, Baralandati, a country will say, Mpeleni ko 1 kwacha. A country will come to you, Vamusha, Mpeleni 1 kwacha. Nara lemba paka paper. That the government of Zambia owes Vamusha 1 kwacha. That is a bond. That is what we call a bond. A bond is really just you borrow, but in exchange for the borrowing, you give Vamusha ka paper, ka piece of paper. Mr. Vamusha has lent the Zambian government 1 kwacha. The Zambian government owes Vamusha 1 kwacha. Now, the beauty about a bond is that Vamusha can take that bond, vaishtisha kuli umbi. Mamona, kuli grieve. Boy, umfwa. I lent the Zambian government 1 kwacha. Naliba pera 1 kwacha. Nomba, banje watu wakampera in 10 years time. But I think therefore in the rama nomba, I've got a emergency. So do this. Mwarampera ko 90 ngwe. Mwarampera 90 ngwe in exchange for this piece of paper. Mamona. So mwashtisha pali 90 ngwe. Then I'll get that piece of paper. Wait for 10 years. Ngakwa na 10 years nkayako. Munsha, you gave him this piece of paper. I owe you. You gave him this piece of paper. Na isa nombo kusenda 1 kwacha yande. Barampera 1 kwacha. Na panga po ka 10 ngwe ka profit. So basically, but that's how it works.
So that's the money that they went and borrowed, 750. You were talking about those bonds.
Yeah, so that's what they effectively did. They just issued them an IOU. So there are people around the world now who owe pieces of paper that total up to $750 million. By the way, Kai, we issued foot in IMF 2014, I think 1 billion. In 2015, 1 billion 25, right? So per money, 3 billion. So there are people around the world who hold Zambian commercial paper. That are my Eurobond investors. There are these people who owe this money, and they've got pieces of paper as proof. That's just the proof to show that they are owed money. Bambi shtisha, Bambi, they are still holding, Bambi shirava, but there are people around the world who are owning those pieces of paper. And the first one is due. It was 10 years, we borrowed in 2012. It's due next year, in 2022. So bakesa fenetuma paper to awati. Twaisa nomba mkupoka. Lipireni. Okay. But so the problem was, the plan was good. It was to catch up infrastructure-wise. I think most people will say we were lagging behind infrastructure. The execution was what was a problem. First of all, the duration yama loans was too short. 10 years wa munsha kupanga road ikabweshe ndarama. It's really far-fetched. This thing takes 30 years. These are 30-year type of investments. So whatever the structure ama deals in 2012, they were short-sighted, but also I think mwalimu ama chancer, ama opportunists, right? There were fees to be made, like I just illustrated. That's why these things are important to be done transparently, to be done in the open, so that we know what's what anyways. So basically we begin to borrow very fast. We borrow fiafine. Now, the thing about these bonds, when you borrow a bond, when you issue bonds, you have to pay interest on them every year. Pay interest on it. So the interest payments also began to happen after Twachta borrow fiafine. So basically, by the time Edgar Lungu is becoming president, clearly we already have the makings of Ofubarandama economist at a debt crisis.
Okay.
It was becoming clear at Inkongole ya pakisha. We ready to tulimuchibe nomba. Twabutuka sana. That's when Edgar Lungu comes into power, right? If it's at the household number mamo natawe bamdara Inkongole shapaka. This is too much. So this is a problem we entered into in 2015 when Edgar Lungu becomes president. He inherits a serious debt situation, right? And he's unlucky. In that year he's president, we have a drought, a crazy drought, right? Where we have serious electricity shortages, the water at Kariba, Yasayapona, and then we have to start importing electricity.
And then one minister told us ukwebati nga mlefu ayatame nshi yabwerere mwaya stashani ukuyasundira mo teine teine.
I know, yeah, but we shama engineers whether that solution works or not. In a way, economist.
I want to complain at load shedding. Uyo minister oyo. Dr. Chelwa. Pantu mule lumbula bantu.
Yeah.
Why very abantu ko bati ngale fukuchita few kariba. Kuti bayasundira mo.
Exactly.
Yes. The drought with Edgar Lungu.
So exactly. So he has a couple of problems when he becomes president. One of them is this a drought and huge, serious electricity load shedding. I think the first time we're experiencing load shedding of that scale in the country's history. So we had to start importing electricity. And I think there was a Turkish ship that had to, Kumaputo somewhere, it had to be paid in US dollars. So really, he's in that kind of mess. But basically, this debt problem now begins to weigh the country down, right? So that's effort.
Any reason why you've mentioned Euro bonds? Okay, so 3 billion so far, but you've not mentioned the Chinese things that are going on. What's going on?
I'm coming there because now you remember that. So when Edgar Lungu now inherits this debt-ridden country that is already indebted, which has his debt burden. I mean, when Stumbeko Msokotwane read his last budget under MMD, our external debt was $1 billion. About $900 million, approximately $1 billion. That's the debt when Stumbeko Msokotwane read. Go and read the last budget. You will see it. It's very interesting. That's that was a stock of debt. By the time Edgar Lungu is becoming president, we're about 4 billion, 5 billion. So it has already gone up 400%. Oh, that's crazy. So if your debt grows up by that much, imagine the interest payments on the debt. They've also shot up, right? So that's a problem that he inherits. And that is why options like China now begin to look attractive. Mamona, now I've got a problem. In Kongoreoku, Nashikawa. I have infrastructure projects to finish off. Sata. I've got an election that's looming in 2016. If you forward all these kinds of things, sort of conspire in a very vicious way, such that China becomes an option. So no mbama Chinese na wena waingira mambo kuingira fast. Those kinds of things. But one has to feel sorry for the man because he was an accidental president who also inherited a really, really bad fiscal situation. A very heavy one.
By accident, you mean tale plana na mind mumu akweta mwali ukoba tukuti ateka. Every film so fast.
And then inherits that kind of situation. I mean, and remember, he becomes president with he becomes president in January 2015. In August 2016, there's an election.
Right.
And then you have a debt burden, which might require for you to slow down expenditure. But you have an election that's coming up that you need to win.
Right.
So this is a really tough position that Mr. Lungu was in. That's a situation that he inherits. So in 2015, it's quite clear that we have a debt problem. And that is at the time that we begin to make overtures. Kwambo kulanda na IMF, ilo tuambire palia. Imwe bantu chile monekati we're in trouble. Mwalaisa mtu wafweko. That's when there's discussions start. They never really reached conclusion, as you know. The discussions dragged. Pakati patos to atamfia kona IMF representative, if you remember, you know.
Now, do you know how much we got from China? Okay, so I am bonds because sometimes you have more transparent. Am I correct in making that assessment?
I don't know. That's a very important question about transparency. I like to believe our government. I know you believe. I like how you always say you believe in our courts. You know, because as a lawyer, you believe in our court system and in our judiciary.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You always say that. I'm always impressed when I hear you say, I trust our judges. I also like to believe I trust our people at the Ministry of Finance. Would they hide? You know, because hiding debt, I think this is a very serious thing to hide it. It is possible they hid, but I maybe I'm very optimistic. I trust that they didn't hide. I trust the figures that subsequent ministers of finance used to issue statements, used to issue in Parliament. Because I don't think you can go to Parliament and Babalianga and Parliament, but no, the debt is actually this, country like this. That is serious. That's a serious offense that one is committing to do that. So now, how you asked me the question, how much is a Chinese debt, right? The last time I ran the numbers, I think the last budget statement that was given on the debt was Minister Waliangandu. He gave a statement that the debt was $12 billion. I imagine it has grown, external debt, that is external, right? Imagine it has grown. Imagine it was 1 billion when Msokotwane was leaving. It's $12 billion or thereabout. I think the Chinese debt, the last calculation I made, according to the Zambian government, is about 4 billion somewhere there. You know, 4 billion might be Chinese debt. And I think this business of hidden debt, because debt is very complicated. In Congole, when it comes to a government, it's very complicated in the definitions. You know,
what is the issue? Complicated. You know, if you go kuli lunda, because lunda, what you miss on calculating. Because when you pay 1,000 kwacha, next payday, you must give back that 1,000 kwacha with a 500 kwacha.
Yes.
If you miss it, it doubles. So with
but you know, now with the country where Musha Fichitika quality contingent liabilities. These are not, it's not like money has moved from the lender to yourself. It's, you know, it's a contingent liability. It's the government can issue a public guarantee. For example, the government can issue a public guarantee in favor of ZESCO. ZESCO therefore Kongola broad kushtama transformer. Number the company that is because you know things like transformers are huge kind of expense. You pay in parts. So ZESCO may want to buy transformers. Now the company that's selling transformers abroad may say, ZESCO, then ZESCO will go to the parent, the government, and say, Minister of Finance, who is a body corporate, can you issue a guarantee in favor of ZESCO, which will say, if ZESCO fails to pay, the Zambian government will pay. Now, that is a liability in Congole, but it's not quite like ati bali tupera wanankani wa China, bali tupera 100 million yari ingiramo account. That's a separate kind of thing. So these definitions often tend to confuse people. Kwalioma definitions, kwalioma categories. You know, IMBI has not been dispersed. Might have agreed, Mwali Sainaka agreement, but Tawashita disperse. And there is an entire unit at Ministry of Finance called the Debt Management Unit. In principle, that unit or department is supposed to be on top of all these things. And I'm sure when the new minister became Minister of Finance, Valewachita brief, Honorable Dr. Msokotwane, ama contingent liabilities ni so, ama guarantees ni so, ama concessional loans ni so, ama commercial loans ni so. Kwale ama categories yang Congole. So it's most
It's
people
not
think of,
straightforward. It's not something
no,
here going no?
no. That's why I want to spend years kuskuru, like you. As a lawyer, you spent years. Quite about different kinds of law, different kinds of offenses, manslaughter, murder, shan yuko, momwe. But is it manslaughter? Is it murder? Is it premeditated murder? All these kinds of complications. Therefore, I in Congo.
Okay, so then he borrows, and around 2015, 2016, what happens thereafter?
So we're clearly now in the throes of what is called a debt crisis. So it's quite clear that the country's accounts, a country's fiscal accounts, the country's finances are in a problem, are in the red. Then exchange rate, yes, when those things start to happen, exchange rate is the rate of a kwacha to the dollar. Kwacha, because that is a sign that the country is undergoing, if we're under technically called a balance of payments crisis. The country is increasingly having a shortage of foreign exchange. Right? Why is foreign exchange in short supply? We're servicing this debt that has gone up now by 500%, as you can imagine. So we're paying debt service. At the same time, we need to import fimbi fidafine. At the same time, our inflows of foreign exchange from copper, from other sources, from investors, from people abroad also slows down, precisely because the inflows slow down because of the confidence issue. People begin to have doubts about the ability of the Edgar Lungu administration to steer the ship called Zambia. People begin to have doubts. So people wanted to invest in the country slow down. They see that huge load shedding issue in 2015. That thing was huge. I mean, power outages of up to 8 hours a day. Imagine what it did for business, what it did for prospective business. So all these things slow down, right? So this is the challenge that Edgar Lungu has when he becomes president. He wins the election narrowly, 100,000 votes, as you remember, and then he appoints his first Minister of Finance as Felix Mutati. Now, just to show you,
I just need to be very clear here. 100,000 was not narrow. It becomes narrow. It becomes narrow when you look at this landslide that we've just experienced. Otherwise, 100,000 was a landslide.
I remember it was 50.5 versus Katushingani 48%.
Yes, Mwanawasa Kachingani one vote away in Mazo. Sata Kachingani 50,000. Mwanawasa 50,000. Sata 30,000. 30,000 Sata.
No, I think it's important to know the limits of your expertise. Politics, Shai Shiva. So I will leave it to you. That is not a narrow victory. It is a landslide of epic proportions, 100,000 votes.
Continue, Doctor.
No, mwandishi wakai ati kusiana kosiana kwa nchito. Bambi ma analyst wa politics, bambi ma analyst wa economics. So I'll stick to my lane. But yes, so to show you just how bad the economy was during Edgar Lungu's time, you need to see how many times he changed Minister of Finance. That is often a sign that the country's economy is on its knees when a president, the turnover at Minister of Finance is high. Remember, it starts with Alexander Chikwanda, right? In 2015. And then in 2016, he brings
Alexander Kaloba Chikwanda. He's your uncle, so I need to be careful. He's Alexander Kaloba Chikwanda.
No, I thought he was Alexander Bwalia Chikwanda, ABC, but I didn't know that Kwali wako na yoke Kaloba Chikwanda. So anyways, so he has Alexander Chikwanda as minister, where I think Chikwanda retires from politics, and then Felix Mutati is minister in when he becomes president 2016, when he enters into Katushingani second term, first term, yalishita confused ruling yaku court, but you are the expert on that one. So Felix Mutati is Minister of Finance. I think Felix Mutati is told to step aside. Kwaisa Margaret Mwanakatwe, she also tries, she's told to step aside, eventually Kwaisa the Bwaliangandu. So that just shows you that turnover. Remember, Ngandu Magande was minister from 2002. I think, Mwanawasa won in December of 2001.
Right.
2002 up until I think the RB administration of
Right. Yeah.
2008. That's
Yeah.
a long tenure as Minister of Finance. And it coincides with the golden age that you told us. So again, when things are good, a Minister of Finance stays. When things are bad, there's high turnover. So most people will say President Lungu didn't act. For me, I could see the desperation there. That turnover is unprecedented. I think the average tenure there must have been 1 year or 2 years as Minister of Finance. Anyway, so in 2016 to 2021, President Lungu is really battling with the economy. He's really battling. We have runaway inflation because the exchange rate the kwacha is falling. As the kwacha is falling, if chitika number, we need more kwachas to import. So inflation,
Right.
inflation prices of goods and services. Yambo kwela. I don't need to tell this.
Umutengo.
Umutengo wa
Wa
unga wafintu, especially ubunga. Just look at the price of ubunga 2016 versus 2021. You'll see that things are going up. So that's the mess that he inherits. And then he tries very much to get himself on an IMF program, but that failed. It failed. Every year the talks would disintegrate. They would meet, the talks disintegrated. Then towards the
The
end
rumor
there,
I hear is that it was disintegrating because the Zambian government was not honest about what was happening.
that's the problem.
They begin using their language. Sovereign guarantee, ZESCO guarantee. And then without telling us actually ZESCO has borrowed some money and the Zambian government has
guaranteed that debt.
Guaranteed that they were refusing. Kuma Chinese uko. So I think Edgar Lungu's trouble was that he never told us the truth. In my opinion, it wasn't because of our economy. I think.
No, it's interesting. I mean, it's a fascinating discussion. It's possible that his troubles that he was not honest or forthcoming with his people. It is also possible that we didn't believe him. I think towards the end there, the PF just became unbelievable. They just became mistrusted. And I think they had almost dug their own grave in the sense that, one of the most important things about a president, I think the way I see it, they have to be credible. They have to be believable. When Chelwa told us, tighten your belts in 1991, people said, how far should we tighten, Your Excellency? Because they believed in him, right? They believed in what he was trying to do. As like right now, we're believing in President Hichilema. We believe him. We believe in him so much. He's credible. We believe in the man. And I think somewhere along the way, the PF lost that trust, and which was fatal because they could be telling the truth, but we could not believe them. That was the problem, you see. So that was, I think, their problem because any head of state has to be credible. He has to be believable. When he tells you, Wane, we owe 1 billion, we should say, oh, we believe the man. And Wane, to pay off this 1 billion, we will have to sacrifice A, B, C, D. We should believe him. That's how nations go forward. They have a believable leader. I think the PF, for some reason, lost that trust. I don't know at what point they lost that trust. Was it that because Michael Sata
I can tell you why. Cadres, lies, exaggerations, lack of the arrogance.
I see. That's interesting. So those factors.
And one more thing, Dr. Chelwa, lack of adherence to the rule of law.
Okay.
That government would just find you. Doctor, Milo, you would have been summoned at police.
Yeah. Wow.
Dr. Chelwa, please continue. Today is your day. Not my day.
My God. So basically, Wamunsha, that's what happened. I think we lost trust in that government, and you have given very good reasons why that trust was lost. So it's difficult for me to say with certainty that no, there were lies. The talks fell apart precisely because the government could not disclose the loans. I've heard different versions of that argument. I've heard the argument that some of the demands by the IMF were going to be political suicide for the PF. Yeah, for example, the IMF did not like the fertilizer input support, which is now the farmer input support program, because the IMF was thinking at which is actually true because we know from the Auditor General's reports that some of those contracts, for example, the supply of fertilizer, because we import all this fertilizer abroad, the transportation of the fertilizer, some of those contracts are very murky. We don't know what's going on there. So the IMF particularly was very particular about that issue. And the PF was worried. The 1 million farmers who we have on FISP might backfire in the election. That's the one version. But I think the truth is somewhere in between. There is this honest pushback from Waliangando and colleagues about removal of those subsidies, but there's also the lack of transparency. There's also the lack of trust. The IMF possibly didn't trust, just like us, we lost trust in the government. The IMF might have lost trust that this is a credible government. This is the kind of government. Yeah, especially some decisions. I'll talk about one decision which surprised me as an economist. One of the most sacred institutions in any country is the central bank. The central bank is so sacred that even when things are going south, we say the central bank will not be touched. At least we have an independent central bank, which is staffed by professional people, headed by a professional. And then in one Saturday afternoon, I got a text message from a friend saying, Dr. Denny Kalialia, the then governor, this is in September of 2020, has been fired. Right? So I said, oh, anyways, it happens. That's the prerogative of the president to dismiss a governor. But I hope he's replacing him with somebody better, because I know Dr. Kalialia has been at loggerheads with it. Dr. Kalialia spoke his mind, as you remember. He would speak, which is unusual for a central bank governor. He would speak and say, ipesi yankongole hii ikatuletelera bani, because he knew that he would have problems defending the kwacha. That's one role of the central bank governor, to defend the currency. So he knew he would suffer. Anyways, Dr. Kalele is fired. Then in his replacement, I hear Mr. Christopher Mvunga is his replacement. I have every respect for Mr. Mvunga, right? He's certainly an accomplished banker and accountant, but I don't think he had the CV to be governor of the Central Bank of Zambia. When that happened, my heart broke. And I think other people around the world saw it. The IMF even issued a very short statement showing concern, which was unusual, right? So this is how I would characterize, the Edgar Lungu administration. Like you said, lack of transparency, lack of policy coherence, lack of clear communication about where we were going as a country. Turnover at the Ministry of Finance, just changing ministers, Fidafine, it really shows that this, things are really amiss here. And then COVID hit. Then to put the knife in the dagger, we have the COVID crisis, right? So it's almost like Mr. Lungu comes in with a crisis, exits when there's a crisis.
I think, because there was a lot of confusion that was going on. I know from the political side, from the social justice side, from the legal perspective, it was a disaster. And I think our people agreed and gave the gentleman a 1 million gap loss, which is pretty remarkable. Yeah, now, we're going to open it up to our friends. We have a fantastic team of friends here. They are going to give you serious questions. You'll be surprised. You better prepare yourself. Okay, I saw your comments about what Mr. Sean Zero was saying. Now, the reason why I call him Mr. Sean Zero is because he's one of the good gentlemen who received 0 votes across the country. But Sean Zero is also quite an interesting character. He's interesting because he speaks some things and some things have some sense in them, you see? So he's a guy, Sean Zero, but he says some things that seem to make a little bit of sense. The other thing is, what I don't like about Mr. Sean Zero is that he is issuing statements that border on tribalism, okay? Now, I don't like tribalism. Nomba abatonga tabafira okulaenda kona kali mu techalo chawo, balenda apologetically. That I don't want. That we have made it very sure here on TV Bakwetu. We don't want. We rise together as one country, or fall together, perish like fools. So number when Sean Zero atampa kokulanda ati ukulabonfia this language of cattle, cows, and the cattle farm, we all know that that's a slur against our southern citizens. That's what I dislike. Otherwise, the gentleman can critique this new government. In fact, he did very well to start early, because if you want to hold a government accountable, you start early. I'm okay with that. Where I draw the line is this tendency he has of going to cows, cattle, cow mentality. That is not right. The other thing is this thing that is always about language. No, only Bemba and Nyanja are national languages. That is nonsense. That is nonsense. If people want to have Tonga, it's okay. If Tonga is spoken at State House, it's okay. In fact, Echilema wila umfono ubingorera ndechi Tonga pa State House, because Tonga is a Zambian language. Kainshi kula ndechi Tonga in State House. That's what we want to see. That's unshile umfwa. Echilema ngaya ndechi Tonga. Nishi you are the problem. You are well, shide umfwa Tonga ngalanda Echilema. You are the problem. Otherwise, this nonsense of saying only English and Nyanja thing is nonsense. Anyway. I went out a little bit. So you as well expressed some skepticism, and in fact you praised Sean Zero's approach a little bit. What is going on with the IMF? And in fact, what you said further was the fact that Mr. Hichilema's speech, President Hichilema's speech in Parliament, did not even mention IMF. You were thinking there could be some change there, because Mr. Hichilema was quite consistent with IMF. IMF will negotiate, Bali will pay, Bali will negotiate, Bali will pay. Very important. And then in the speech, you say that there was no IMF. What options do we have?
By the way, I think it's important to give some context of what is it we're talking about now, right? And by the way, I'm with you when I say that, when you say that this tribal sort of undertones of some of Sean Temble's posting are worrying. I mean, initially I really liked his checks and balances. But I think when I saw that cattle comment, I also got, I said, man, what are you doing now? I mean, you're doing a really good job doing checks and balances, and then you're going down this dark alleyway of tribalism. So I hope I employ him to stop that, to stop, not do that anymore.
Otherwise, he's a good guy. I think what he's saying is good. He can say whatever he's saying without using tribal undertones.
That's true.
Dr. Grieve Chelwa, in Darfur, when people begin this tribalism, speaking against the section of our people, I really get annoyed. And I talk about it because these people do it. If you want us to stop talking about tribalism, come when Sean Zero, Aleke, Ugushova Hichilem about cow mentality or cow farms.
No, you should stop that. It's really exactly. And the Zambian people have emphatically said no to tribalism. 2.8 million people voted across our great land, voted for President Hichilema. And clearly, the Zambian people dislike tribalism, and I think Mr. Tembo should stop that. Anyways, coming back to the discussion at hand. So basically, we are in a debt problem. That's the economy that Mr. Hichilema has inherited. We have a bond. Remember, we have a bond that's due next year. And the 10-year bond, 10 years, you know what Kutari to African number. Next year. To the Fuiro Kulipira next year. In big case at 2024, $1.1 billion. And I think the last one, 2025, 1.25 billion.
Are you saying that we must actually have that money, like $1 billion?
No, we have to. We owe these people. Namkongoshe ndarama. Namkongosha one kwacha. Nangadunkesa mailonga na Africa. You have to have the one kwacha.
What Nindwala Corona? If you Pindendarama, go I surrender now. What Bushendarama Shant National.
We have these obligations that are coming up. Now, it's a bit more, the discussion can be a bit technical because it's not entirely the case. You see, in any given year, a country has inflows of US dollars and outflows, and they're different sources, and then we net those off. So we need to find some substantial amount of money to pay off some of this debt. Now, so we have this problem that Mr. Hichilema has inherited, not quite in Congole. we need to resolve this problem, because if we don't resolve it, the kwacha will always keep on depreciating. Then that's a sign that you've got a debt crisis, you've got a balance of payments crisis. So the question is, we need to find umuntu abroad kutupela dollars so that we can meet some of these obligations that are due soon, right?
Yeah.
Now, historically, in history, the only option that poor countries had was the IMF. That's what used to happen in 1978 and 90, because that was the only option for poor countries. You'd have to go to the IMF, and then they will give you, get on an IMF program. The Minister of Finance, a very interesting process. The Minister of Finance writes a letter to the executive board of the IMF called a letter of intent. That letter is written by the Minister of Finance on behalf of 18 million Zambians, saying to refo kukongole ndarama, right? And then the executive board will assess that letter. They'll send an IMF team to come and talk to you guys, wachama calculations yabo, and then they'll decide whether you qualify for the loan or not. So that's how it was done before. This is primarily when you are in a balance of payment crisis like we are, you'll go to the IMF and you borrow. Now, what Sean Tembo is arguing, he says, Chalona chichinjako briefly. Now we can even access international capital markets. So there's another source of foreign exchange that has popped up, the international capital market. So Sean Tembo is saying, refinance the debt. I think when you get a mortgage, I'm sure people get mortgages in Calgary. You can refinance it. You can take a mortgage on the first mortgage. Exactly. So that is what Sean is saying. He's saying, $750 million that's due next year, sorry. Why don't we go to the international markets? Let us borrow, right? We borrow for another 10 years, number one. So
and what he's doing is he's saying that we've already got something positive going on with the Hakainde administration, a lot of goodwill. Exactly. And so can we leverage the goodwill of the Hakainde administration by going not to the IMF, but to the Shylocks?
They're Shylocks either way. They're Shylocks, whether the IMF.
But somebody has just told me, Dr. Grieve, please don't be too doctorate on me. Okay, I'm a very innocent man from Chuempala. What they're saying is that the IMF rate is lower, and then it comes with some conditions because if we lack discipline, so to speak, we lack discipline. Because even this disciplined Hichilema we are seeing today, if political pressure builds up, you also become indisciplined. Because discipline sometimes it's the political pressure that imposes indiscipline on them. So IMF, the advantage is IMF. What I'm saying is IMF at least impose some discipline.
Okay.
Isn't that better than going to Shylocks? Because Shylocks don't care as long as you tell them that you're going to pay them money.
I mean, like with anything in the world, there are trade-offs. That's what we ought to know. Like anything in the world, there are trade-offs. There are good and bad aspects to it. It's certainly true that in the interest rate alone, on an interest rate basis, or even though I don't think this argument is entirely true, I'll tackle it in a second. The interest rate alone, it's certainly true that the nominal interest rate, the interest rate that will be charged on IMF loans, might be lower than the interest rates that the capital markets will charge you, right? Now, to this story, that's one part of the cost of borrowing. That's the cost of borrowing. That's one part to it. We need to add to this part of the cost of borrowing the fact that those conditions, those conditions tend to be anti-poor, anti-chiwempala, if you almost missed grade 9. Exactly. Right. We need to add those as costs of the conditions. As the cost of the IMF program, the interest rate fee, we need to add the conditionalities because those are a cost. Those are a cost on the country. The fact that we might miss out on a Mr. Munsha not writing the exam, that is a cost we have to factor in.
Right. So because I missed it.
Yes.
From experience, I missed it. It was just terrible. Sometimes go chef Dr. Grieve. Wamona wa Munsha,
Number hicho konko chenu which can be multiplied many folds across the entire country. That is a cost we need to factor into this borrowing the IMF. Let me
Are
finish
there
one point.
peers?
Let me
No,
finish
no, I'm going
one.
to cut you, Dr. Chelwa. Are
Yes.
there peers in your industry that support this Sean Zero's view?
Are there peers in my
Yeah,
section? I mean, there are a couple of economists who've written to me privately who support me. It's very difficult to go against the IMF publicly. It
right.
turns out it's very,
Yeah.
very difficult. I
Is
think there are
it easier
more.
for you as an academic and activist economist? Oh, remember, I'm even giving you a title at activist economist.
Thank you. I accept it. I accept. That's what I want to be. Because in
Right.
Shaire Kukuru, for the sake of ukulemba fiama book nama paper, I did a PhD in economics to help in bettering the lives of the men and women of Zambia who I care
Okay.
for dearly. Right now, I
Is
wanted to finish the point. There's an important point I wanted to give about the interest rates that most people are missing. We have in State House today, if he has, a man who has spent a big chunk of his life deal structuring, convincing people to invest in his companies. We have a man with an MBA. We have one of this country's, perhaps even this continent's greatest business sons. Now, those interest rates in the capital markets are not destiny. Our very able president in State House, I have every confidence in him going abroad, negotiating a deal as good as the IMF would give us without the conditions. He is a deal structuring genius, right? If we had a lawyer in State House like Munsha, just joking, I would have said, "Come in, IMF." But we have a man in State House who really, and we've already seen it, the way he talks, the Kwacha appreciated. What more if he put together a plan and engaged people abroad in a serious manner with a good deal on his card, would get a much better interest rate, perhaps not as low as the IMF, close to that. However, with policy flexibility, with us owning our own destiny. Wamushatetimule ati we need outsiders to discipline us. Honestly, naisa munganda yenu namba okulanda ati wamunsha imwe mwali ba careless. From this day onwards, nineona kulalemba budget yenu. Is that a
no, no, no.
sign?
What I meant was political pressure. Anyway, but mumayando mulefu aikwako an external discipline person. Politics, yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reality. You know?
I don't know. I think
Political pressure, mukamona. Oyu we know you reasonable. You could atampa kuchita bendi fi amaros. Would you be open to talk to this government? Are they talking to you? You don't have to reveal what ought not to be revealed, but are they coming to you? Are they trying to listen to you? Or you are using your channels to speak to them? Every government has its own preferred characters.
No, I mean, nobody from the government has reached out to me. I mean, certainly it will be my honor to input into a deal that's the best for the country. That is what I see as my moral responsibility, right? And when I talk like this and I type on my Facebook page, I'm merely trying to speak for the poor. That is what I'm trying to do. But no, to answer your question, Wamunsha, nobody has talked to me from the government.
Okay.
And they don't need me. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Stumbeko Msokotwane, we know you are a very accomplished economist. Not our economist from Chuempala, Dr. Grieve Chelwa, is ready to assist. And so, Mutonton Kanyap, we are not telling you who to work with. This son of the soil is ready. And it's a little bit objective. A little bit objective.
Hello, Kulina Imbi solution. Kulina Imbi solution. There are many solutions here, and that's why I'm imploring the president and the minister of finance to consult widely. Many sections of society. Kulikona debt restructuring. Right? Efo mwalanda tuwaisa wanani kani wali awaze zulu waisa no mbati one kwacha andili kwisa. Masa mwalanda awe tuwalisa tuwalwala ko COVID ifintu fyali chitika. So chiteni so. Nkampera ko 2 kwacha, nkampera ko ni 1 kwacha tefyo, nkampera ko 20 ngwe mailo, 50 ngwe the following week, mbinga pwikisha the other time. That's called debt restructuring. You can restructure the debt. Now, who is an expert on debt restructuring? Again, His Excellency Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, the president of Zambia. We are so lucky to have in State House. This is the first time we're having somebody with such a CV. I cannot think of anybody better to put together a debt restructuring deal than Mr. Hichilema. In a debt restructuring, mamona, kulimpifuna yambe ama solutions. Go ahead.
Dr. Grieve, this is about 3 p.m. in Calgary. I don't know what time it is in Chiwempala. What time is it?
It is 23 hours, Chiwempala.
Okay. Now, this is what I am looking at doing. We have a series of our friends that want to ask you questions. Now, I'm going to put an end to this broadcast. I'm going to restart a new one with our friends that are going to ask you. Our dear friends, I just want to know whether you'll be open to me posting a new link. Would that be okay? Beauty, Patrick, just let me know if, so that we keep this one at 1 hour, 30 minutes, and then we are going to have what I'm going to call a question and answer session with Dr. Grieve Chelwa. Himba, is that okay? I just want to see, Vakafwimbi. Mukelabai. Okay, so I'm going to put an end to this. For those that are supposed to send us stars, please do so. I'm bringing you important guests on TV Bakwetu. The least that you can do is to send stars. Dr. Grieve, we've monetized my Facebook page, and so you are a product.
Okay. IMF talk. No product.
So when I bring credible people like you, even the profile of TV Bakwetu goes up. So you are my stock.
Oh man.
Thank you very much, Dr. Grieve. If it's agreeable with you and this is 11 o'clock already, what we are going to do is we'll come back momentarily. I'm going to post the link, and then our friends are going to come and we're going to have a question and answer session momentarily. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fine. Thank you so much.